My name is Brianna Leal, and this is my presentation on the abortion laws in Texas. Let's talk about the conservative power in Texas. As conservative power tightens its grip on Texas politics, the state's legislature has waged an aggressive, years-long campaign to restrict and ultimately erase the right to an abortion. To the right, you'll see Texas GOP's lawmakers' first draft of the congressional map for the year 2025. Ultimately targeting 5 Democratic U.S. House member seats from cities ranging from Houston, Austin, and Dallas. So, what is abortion? According to Yale Medicine, abortion is a termination of a pregnancy before the fetus can survive outside the uterus. It can occur spontaneously, known as a miscarriage, or be induced intentionally through medical or surgical procedures. So, let's talk about the history of abortion laws in Texas. In 1857, Texas adopted its first penal code banning abortion. The law made it a crime to perform or furnish the means for an abortion. The only exception was to save a pregnant woman's life. Individuals who received an abortion were not exempt, and if were found guilty, could face 2 to 5 years of confinement. In 1973, one of the most renowned cases took place, Roe v. Wade. In 1970, Norma McCorvey, also known as Jane Doe, filed a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of a Texas law that made abortion illegal except to save a woman's life. Norma McCorvey wanted to terminate her pregnancy but was unable to and stated that the law violated her right to privacy. In 1973, the Supreme Court ruled that the Texas statute was unconstitutional and violated the right to privacy. It established a woman's right to abortion during the first trimester under the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. To the right, you'll see states' regulation on abortion. During the first trimester, it was up to the woman and her doctor to make the decision to have an abortion. In the second trimester, states could regulate but not ban abortion. In the third trimester, states had full control on whether to regulate or prohibit abortion when a fetus was viable to survive outside the womb.
The origin of the Roe v. Wade case happened more than 50 years ago, and it happened right here in North Texas. It all started in Dallas with a pregnant woman who was looking for an abortion. Andrea Lucia with the history lesson now that started this entire legal debate.
The historic Supreme Court decision that legalized abortion began here at the old federal courthouse in downtown Dallas. For a $15 fee, a 27-year-old attorney named Linda Coffey filed the case. She'd been searching for a way to challenge the laws making abortion illegal when she met Norma McCorvey, or as she's known to history, Jane Roe.
She didn't care much about the movement that she came to represent. She simply wanted an abortion.
Josh Prager spent years researching the history of the case for his book, The Family Roe. McCorvey, he says, was a 21-year-old waitress at a bar in the Oaklawn area, pregnant with her third child and unable to afford travel to a state where abortion was legal.
It was very difficult to find a plaintiff, and you needed to find someone who was sort of unafraid of the stigma and willing to talk openly about her experience. Norma checked all of these boxes.
Sarah Weddington was Coffey's co-counsel, who later argued the case successfully to the Supreme Court at the young age of 26.
They were all little more than kids.
Former Dallas County District Attorney Henry Wade, whose name made up the other half of Roe v. Wade, played little role at all in the case. And when Prager interviewed his son, he learned he wasn't actually opposed to abortion at all.
Kim confided in me that his father, even though he was charged to enforce the laws of the state, privately he was pro-choice, which is sort of incredible.
Despite the success of the court case that allowed women across this country to gain access to abortion, it all came too late for McCorvey herself. She gave birth here in Dallas to a daughter who is still alive today. In Dallas, Andrea Lucia, CBS 11 News.
Well, there is a lot of information to follow when it comes to the Roe v. Wade.
Another notorious case took place in 1992, known as the Planned Parenthood versus Casey case. In 1989, Pennsylvania enacted the Abortion Control Act, which imposed several restrictions on women seeking abortion. The law required a woman to obtain consent from her doctor, husband, and if she was a minor, her parents at least 24 hours before the procedure. In 1982, Planned Parenthood argued that the Abortion Control Act violated the constitutional right to an abortion established in Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of Planned Parenthood, upholding Roe v. Wade case, but altered its framework. It removed the needed consent from a woman's husband. It introduced the unburdened standard for evaluating abortion regulation. It also allowed states to regulate abortions as long as those regulations didn't create a substantial obstacle for women seeking an abortion. States could now regulate or prohibit abortions once the fetus was viable. Law of 1999 added Chapter 33 to the Texas Family Code. It required physicians to notify a parent or legal guardian 48 hours before performing an abortion on an unemancipated minor. Physicians were prohibited from proceeding with an abortion unless proper parental notification had been given. However, minors could seek a court order to bypass this requirement. In 2003, Women's Right to Know Act was signed into law. House Bill 15 was introduced in the 78th regular session, and after successfully passing the House and the Senate, it was ultimately signed into law. This required physicians performing abortion to provide patients with information about medical risks and available sources of support. It also mandated a 24-hour waiting period before the procedure. In 2011, Governor Rick Perry signed House Bill 15 from the 82nd regular session, requiring physicians to conduct a sonogram at least 24 hours before performing an abortion. Physicians had to display the sonogram so it was visible to the patient, describe the description of the fetus, a simultaneous verbal explanation of the results of the live real-time sonogram images, including a medical description of the dimensions of the embryo or fetus, the presence of cardiac activity, and the presence of arms, legs, and internal organs. They also had to make the heartbeat audible so the patient could hear it. Women had the option to see the sonogram and hear the heartbeat. Exceptions to this included rape, incest, or fetal abnormalities. In 2013, House Bill 2 was passed and signed into law. It altered the timeline for abortions, requirements for doctors, and even clinics. In regards to the timeline for abortions, it prohibited abortions after 20 weeks of gestation. Exceptions were if the mother's life was at risk, in cases of rape or an incest. In regard to cases of such matters, it must have been reported before the abortion to law enforcement. It required doctors to have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals, all within 30 miles of the clinic. It made them go through an extensive application and review process, and at times did not guarantee admitting privileges. As for clinics, abortion facilities needed to meet obligatory surgical standards. This covered a range of topics such as construction, lighting, medical equipment, and even staff qualifications.
It is our responsibility and duty to give voice to the unborn, the individuals whose survival is at stake. This bill lives up to that responsibility. It also is our responsibility to improve the quality of care for women in this state, ensuring that any procedure they undergo is performed in clean, sanitary, and safe conditions by capable personnel. We've witnessed far too many stories from Philadelphia to Houston and elsewhere about reckless doctors performing abortions in horrific conditions. We've heard stories about women getting sick, even dying, after treatment at such places. At the end of the day, House Bill 2 makes sure that anyone performing abortions in the state of Texas is doing so in a facility that meets appropriate safety guidelines and that people there are prepared to handle any emergencies that might occur. That is reasonable. That is common sense expectation for those caring for the health and safety of the people of the state of Texas. Today's signing, though, definitely builds upon our continued commitment to protecting life in the state of Texas. Over the past 10 years, we've passed laws requiring parental consent to their minor daughter's abortion, ensuring parents will be involved, ready to provide that much-needed guidance and advice at one of the most critical of moments. We've funded and promoted alternatives to abortion, providing counseling for women on the other options that won't stop the beating heart of a baby. And the reason is because children do deserve the respect of simple recognition before their lives are tragically cut short. I want to thank everyone again that was involved in making today's signing a reality.
This ultimately changed in 2016 with the Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt case. The abortion provider Whole Women's Health challenged the provisions of previous House Bill 2 and argued that the requirements of providers having admitting privileges at nearby hospitals and having to be ambulatory surgical standards was placing an undue burden on women seeking abortions and ultimately did not improve women's health. In 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Texas restrictions created undue burden and was therefore unconstitutional. The court also argued that admitting privileges and requiring ambulatory surgical standards did not improve women's health. House Bill 3994 from the 84th regular session modified the existing law that required minors seeking an abortion to notify their parents or obtain judicial bypass. It also placed stricter requirements on physicians to verify the age and identity of any woman seeking an abortion. The Texas Department of Health and Human Services approved rules requiring burial or cremation of fetal remains after abortions. Senate Bill 8 from the 85th regular session added 2 new subchapters to the Women's Right to Know Act. Subchapter F prohibited partial birth abortions, while Subchapter G prohibited dismemberment abortions, also known as dilation and extraction, both used in second trimester abortions. This bill also upheld the requirement for the burial or cremation of fetal remains. In 2017, House Bill 214 was signed into law by Governor Greg Abbott. This bill required women to pay additional insurance or premium to cover elective abortions, including those to save the lives of the mother. In 2019, Texas passed House Bill 16. This bill criminalized doctors who failed to provide the appropriate medical treatment to babies born alive after failed abortion attempts. Those who were found guilty would be charged a third-degree felony and would have to pay a fine of at least $100,000. Senate Bill 22 of the 86th legislature, known as the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Providers Act, was signed into law by Governor Greg Abbott. This prohibited government entities from entering into partnership or providing any assistance to clinics affiliated with abortion providers. Bill 8 from the 87th regular session, also known as Texas Heartbeat Act, prohibits abortion as early as 6 weeks when a fetal heartbeat is detected. The exception was only to save a woman's life. It created a civil enforcement allowing any person other than a state or local government employee or officer to sue anyone involved in providing or aiding an abortion after a fetal heartbeat was detected. Senate Bill 4 from the 82nd Texas Legislature's second called session added restriction to abortion-inducing medicines. It prevented abortion-inducing medicine to be delivered by mail delivery service or corridor. It also required physicians to examine patients seeking a medical abortion in person. It prevented physicians from prescribing abortion-inducing medicine for pregnancies of more than 49 gestational days. House Bill 1280 from the 87th regular session contained a trigger provision that would ultimately ban abortion 30 days after a specific event occurred. Example would be the overruling of the Roe v. Wade case. In 2022, Jackson's Women's Health Organization and one of its doctors filed a lawsuit challenging Mississippi's Gestational Age Act that prohibited abortions with a few exceptions after 15-week gestational age and stated that it violated the constitutional right to an abortion established in the U.S. Supreme Court cases Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. The U.S. Supreme Court found that Roe v. Wade was wrongly decided and found no right to an abortion included in the U.S. Constitution. As a result, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision, overturned Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, ending a woman's constitutional right to an abortion. This was also one of the triggers listed in the 2021 law. According to Texas Tribune, Justice Samuel Alito said Roe must be overruled because they were egregiously wrong and the arguments were exceptionally weak and so damaging that it amounted to an abuse of judicial authority. How are these abortion laws affecting women in Texas today? The elimination of the constitutional right to an abortion in Texas has directly contributed to a substantial decline in women's health and reproductive rights. Following Texas' abortion ban, deaths among pregnant women and postpartum women in the state's hospitals have risen tremendously and have surpassed rates seen in pre-pandemic years. One of the biggest causes to this was sepsis. So for many of you asking, what is sepsis? Well, according to the CDC, sepsis is the body's extreme response to an infection. It is a life-threatening medical emergency. Sepsis happens when an infection you already have triggers a chain reaction throughout your body. Without timely treatment, sepsis can rapidly lead to tissue damage, organ failure, and even death. To the right, you can see the impact of Texas' abortion ban on sepsis cases. Before the abortion ban was signed into law, the rate of women hospitalized for sepsis during the second trimester was relatively steady. However, after the abortion ban, sepsis cases jumped 50% in 2 years. According to ProPublica, in 2021, 67 patients were diagnosed with sepsis after losing a pregnancy. In 2022, it rose to 90, and in 2023, to 99. According to PBS, women experiencing miscarriages often had to wait until they developed an infection or until no fetal heartbeat was detected before receiving any medical help. Many doctors were afraid to act sooner and feared the legal repercussions of being seen as assisting in an abortion. There's also been a rise in maternal mortality. According to analysis done by Gender Equity Policy Institute, Texas' maternal mortality rate rose 56% after the first full year following the abortion ban. In Texas, a woman's risk of maternal death was 155% higher than in California. Latina mothers in Texas face 3 times more the risk of maternal mortality than those in California. On the graphs from the left, you can see that in regards to Hispanic women, there were maternal deaths per 100,000 births increased from 14.5 in 2019 to 18.9 in 2022. For white women, maternal rates nearly doubled from 2019 to 39.1 in 2022. In regards to Black women, maternal mortality rates increased from 31.6 from 2019 to 43.6 in 2022. In addition to this, there's also been a rise in infant mortality. The table to the right shows annual counts and rates of infant and neonatal deaths for Texas and the rest of the United States. Between 2021 to 2022, there was a 255 death increase in infant mortality in Texas. The death of infants increased from 1,985 to 2,240. This represented a 12.9% increase in infant mortality in Texas alone. When comparing this to the 1.8% increase in all the other states, this was a drastic change. Between 2021 and 2022, the infant mortality rate increased by 8.3% for Texas, while the rate increased 2.2% in the rest of the United States. In regards to neonatal mortality rate, it increased 5.8% in Texas, while it decreased in the rest of the United States. Continued for the fight for abortion rights. In 2023, 5 women sued Texas because they were denied necessary abortions. They were joined in a lawsuit by 2 OBGYNs stating that the confusion among the medical community had prevented many doctors from doing their jobs. Lauren Hall was one of those women in the lawsuit to share her story. At her 19-week anatomy scan, she found that her fetus was developing without a skull. This was anencephaly, a type of neural defect. In anencephaly, the brain, skull, and scalp are either partially or completely missing. Her options were either to remain pregnant until she miscarried or had to face the devastating situation of delivering a baby that would not survive outside the womb. In fear of facing the harsh repercussions of aiding an abortion, her doctor stated he couldn't do anything and instead suggested the couple to leave the state. The couple did just this and had an abortion. This is one of the many heartbreaking situations that women across Texas have been forced to endure. Lauren Hall was denied an abortion because she was past the 6-week ban, yet her fetus had no skull and could not survive outside the womb. How is this acceptable to force a woman to carry a non-viable pregnancy to term? How is it morally justifiable to bring a child into the world only to suffer and die moments later? After being faced with stories such as Lauren Hall's and many others, Republican lawmakers increased their efforts to clear up the language and confusion of the abortion law in Texas. Senate Bill 31 was passed in the 2025 Texas legislative session. This bill allowed physicians to perform abortions if a pregnant woman had a life-threatening condition and introduces new definitions regarding medical emergencies. It states that physicians can act before risk becomes imminent and that life-threatening conditions do not need to be actively injuring the patient. It outlines that physicians must provide treatment that offers the best chance for the unborn child's survival unless it possesses a greater risk to the pregnant woman. It clarifies accidental or unintentional death of an unborn child during treatment and states that it does not violate the law. This year, Senate Bill 33 passed both the House and Senate and was signed into law. This bill prohibits government entities from using taxpayer money to support abortion providers, as well as providing logistical support for abortions. Logistical support includes providing money for childcare, travel, or any form of transportation to or from an abortion provider, lodging, counseling that encourages a woman to have an abortion, and any other services that facilitate the provision of an abortion. Solutions. My first solution would be to modify the current Texas abortion ban. I would want to extend the ban period from 6 weeks to 10 to 12 weeks. This incorporates real-life timelines and allows individuals to process their current situation and also give a good amount of time to decide whether or not they would want to continue with the pregnancy. This allows individuals to make proper financial and/or travel arrangements in a good span amount of time and seek counseling if needed. I would also add exceptions. I would keep current exceptions for saving a woman's life, but add exceptions for rape, incest, and if there were any fatal fetal abnormalities. I would keep the current clarification that passed this year on physician requirements as well as when they can intervene to save a pregnant woman's life. My second solution would be to extend and incorporate sex education in schools' curriculum. In many high schools, including my own, students are taught only the bare minimum about reproduction. We learn about how the body works, but not how to protect ourselves. Contraceptives are rarely discussed in depth, if at all. No one talks about birth control, IUDs, condoms, or how to access them safely and responsibly. This science creates confusion, stigma, and leaves teenagers unprepared to make informed decisions about their sexual health. I would want to make alterations to this. Beginning in 9th grade, students will be required to attend a comprehensive sex education class once a week as part of their standard curriculum. Students will learn how different contraceptions work, like IUD, birth control, condoms, etc., what consent looks like, how to prevent STIs and unwanted pregnancies, and where to access reproductive health services. This doesn't encourage sexual activity, but encourages responsibility. The end of my presentation, and I just want to say thank you for taking the time to Listen to me speak about this important policy in Texas. These are my citations.